The Giants continue to roll through some playoff teams and do serious damage to their playoff odds. Arizona desperately needs a win tonight. And meanwhile, Farhan Zaidi met with the media and admitted that his status with the team moving forward is indeed uncertain.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show for over 5 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. And coming up on today's show, we're going to first get into Farhan Zaidi meeting with the media and going over a lot. And we'll also get into the Giants continuing to just blast through contenders here with an 11-0 emphatic win over the D-backs, as the Giants have done serious damage to their playoff odds. And this game tonight is huge for Arizona, who now is just clinging to a tiny lead, a half-game lead in the standings. But jumping right into the Farhan Zaidi media meeting, I think he met with 4 beat reporters, according to Andrew Baggarly. And Baggarly of The Athletic said that Zaidi sketched out his offseason initiatives and priorities. He signaled a desire to sign or trade for a solid defensive shortstop. He expressed interest in re-signing left-hander and expected free agent Blake Snell. And la-di-da-di-da. And then he said, and he acknowledged the possibility that by the end of the week, none of these decisions will be his to make. And so there is a lot here. Baggarly notes Zaidi, who has another year in his contract plus a club option for 2026, said he has not received clarity on his status from ownership, nor has he sought any. He acknowledged that those discussions are ongoing between Chairman Greg Johnson and an executive board that includes CEO Larry Baer and former franchise star catcher Buster Posey. And he says, anytime you have a disappointing season, Zaidi says, anytime you have a disappointing season, it's my job to evaluate everything in my purview, and it's their job to evaluate everything in my purview plus me. And so I think that process is happening, and I understand it. You look around baseball, there are other teams in the same boat as us with playoff aspirations and it didn't happen, trying to figure out what went wrong and how to be better. I'm still very committed to that. And then I've bolded this part, which means I thought it was important, and here it comes. Johnson has been Zaidi's most fervent and outspoken supporter over Zaidi's 6-year tenure, but dissatisfaction has grown among board members to the point that Johnson might be compelled to make a change. The Giants' uptick in attendance and their improved play down the stretch are other factors to consider, but all indications are that the board has arrived at its decision and are waiting until the season ends to announce a way forward, either with Zaidi or with a search for his replacement, end quote. And so that is the big sentence right there. All indications are that the board has arrived at its decision. And so to hear the two things here, that Farhan Zaidi is saying he acknowledged that he has not received clarity on his status, nor has he sought any. So he hasn't received clarity, and yet they've made a decision. Like those two things would seem, if true, and again, we've seen Baggerly, like he's a great reporter, but like come out with an article and a report, and then it be kind of argued by another outlet like the San Francisco Chronicle that some of the reporting wasn't totally accurate, But if that's true, that Zaidi hasn't received clarity, which it came from his mouth apparently, so that I assume is true. But then Baggerly's report here that all indications are that the board has arrived at its decision and they're waiting until the season ends to announce a way forward. That would seem to me to indicate that he's gone. That would seem to me to indicate that he's gone. Because why, if you've decided that you're going to keep someone, why on earth would you just have them sitting around waiting on you to tell them that? And I mean, kind of you could say the other way. Like, why, if you've decided you're not going to keep someone, why would you like make them suffer and wait it out only to tell them at the very end? It could be that they don't want to cause a disruption, because if you tell him, then he's going to leave immediately. He's not going to like see the season through. It would be, so that to me indicates that there definitely very possibly could be a change there at the very head of baseball operations. I'm not sure how much that would even accomplish. At the end of the day, like their offseason is pretty straightforward. Like I think Zaidi nails a lot of what is obvious about what their path forward is in the offseason. And he's right about a lot of what he says when he indicates basically that they were never going to tear this team down. Basically, the plan was always, and you can fault this plan, and it wasn't necessarily Farhan Zaidi's plan. This is coming from the board of directors and ownership, that this wasn't a team that they wanted to just tear down to the studs like the Baltimore Orioles did. And you could argue that the Orioles, I mean, it's not just arguable, that they're definitely in a better position now because they had so many truly awful seasons that got them really high draft picks. They also, I mean, I was just looking today, 2019 draft, they got Gunnar Henderson, who's like their best player in the the compensation round between the first and the second round. So it's not all about where you pick, but also, Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holiday. I think Rutschman, though, yeah, that was 2019 draft. Yeah, Rutschman. Yes. So anyway, they've turned a corner a little bit in that this team, they forever was like in transition. I'm doing air quotes. And it was like an older team, right? You had Brandon Crawford and Brandon Belt and Evan Longoria and, Buster Posey, who had a magical, great season in his last year and went out on top. But they were an older veteran team, and now they've got a lot of young players. They've got young players coming like Bryce Eldridge, who is discussed and addressed by Farhan Zaidi, and he gets into so much more. He gets into specific topics about himself, and then Blake Snell, Bryce Eldridge, Mike Yastrzemski, Lamont Wade Jr., the first base market, Tyro Estrada, Marco Luciano, and off-season targets. So coming up in just a minute, now that we have that understood, I mean, if Baggerly is right that they've made a decision, I just think that is the key takeaway, that it would seem to indicate that a change is going to happen. So I just wanted to point that out, but also let's hear what Farhan Zaidi has to say, even though, like Baggerly says, it might not matter what he has to say because somebody else might be making these decisions. But then again, a lot of this stuff is somewhat obvious. So we'll get into that. We'll get into the Giants' dominating win and how they're playing great down the stretch. Very great. I mean, not just beyond great. Their best baseball by far of the season is happening right now, and it's hurting the D-backs, and they have a chance to really do some damage tonight. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. Explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about, including, that's right, the baseball cities where your rivals play, like LA or anywhere, really. And for me, I may be headed to some postseason games myself. And it's all about, when I travel, exploring those U.S. cities I've always secretly wanted to learn more about, or not so secretly, with hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, and resorts, plus so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival's city during the postseason. Hey, San Diego, too, is a rival, and they're going. They clinched last night on a triple play against the Dodgers, and that is a great town to check out. So Booking.com delivers exactly the right U.S. stay for you. Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home team's or rival's stadium. No matter what team you're rooting for in the postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. Today's episode is also brought to you in part by our good friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com, and I'm on FanDuel.com as we speak. I've been correct about some of my opinions about these games with the Giants and D-backs. I said, I actually think I said I would take the under on 8.5 last night. Well, the Giants, I didn't see them necessarily scoring 11 runs, but definitely they were heavy underdogs, which I didn't think really made sense with Logan Webb on the mound. 6 shutout innings later, yeah, the Giants won the game. Heavy underdogs tonight at plus 188 on the money line. I think that makes more sense with Mason Black against Zach Gallen. This is definitely the toughest matchup of this series so far. So you can check out that and more, and football with baseball season coming to a close at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, here we go. We're going to get into the rest of what Farhan Zaidi had to say and the Giants biting the snakes. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow, we'll be breaking down the finale of the series. At some point, I'm hoping to speak with Millard from Locked On D-backs, especially if the Giants sweep and put the D-backs out of a playoff spot with 3 to go. That would be awesome, and I would love to rub that in, especially if they miss the playoffs. Oh my gosh. Like, that's what I live for at this point. If my team's out of it, I'm living for knocking your team out of it. That's just how it goes with me, at least. I know some people care more about slightly increasing your chances in the draft lottery, but that's not really just my forte. Anyway, a reminder that you can catch every pitch of the Giants' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM. Just download the SXM app and search the word Giants. So, like one of the things Farhan Zaidi had to say was, he said, I do look at a lot of the silver linings this year. The fact that I think we're going to go into next year with the best group of young players we've had on the roster since I've been here. That's pretty clear. He's right. He's not sugarcoating anything. It's true. Both on the position player side, on the pitching side, that's really something to build on. You look at the last couple of off seasons, we've been very active in free agency. And while maybe that's created some excitement, I do think it's kind of blocked some opportunities for these prospects to sort of get over the hump. This has been, or not been, a typical rebuild. And I like how he says the word rebuild. Like, this has not been a typical rebuild. We've tried to compete every year. So it's not just going to be a teardown with 3 top 5 draft picks. It's taken longer. So this is the comparison to the Orioles I made. That was a complete teardown with multiple top 5 draft picks. He said it's taken longer. Because he didn't say because of that, but what he's saying is because of that. But I think with the players we have, we're kind of on the other side of that, where we have a different nucleus now. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not Belt and Crawford and Longoria and, whoever else veteran player they were like locked into, that it wasn't such a good deal towards the end of it. He said, we have a different nucleus now. Now we have the ability to put a really young team out there and be more targeted in free agency rather than feeling like we've got to go sign 5 or 6 players. And he's right. Like, people complain about the Giants' free agency, and I guess I understand the criticism that not all their signings have worked out. A lot of them have, less so on the position player side, except Matt Chapman this year is having, he was definitely the slam dunk best move. Well, Blake Snell has been great too. So those were 2 really good moves. But yeah, they are in a different spot where you've got some young talent and on both the pitching side and the position player side. And I think it's pretty clear what their needs are going into the offseason. One of those, thoughts. Well, let's just hear one more thing that he said in general about the organization. He said, Zaidi, first of all, that his health has improved since being hospitalized at the end of August. He declined to speculate on whether he'd be retained. When asked if ownership continues to have the same amount of faith in his vision for the franchise, he acknowledged that it's been an ongoing process with him to mesh his methods with some of the cultural expectations that might be more pronounced among Giants fans. But he did not describe a fractured relationship with ownership, saying that he and the board are very much, he and the board very much sync up in the vision of the team we want, which is a younger team. We want a more athletic team. We want some consistency in the rotation and the lineup. And then I'm like, wait a second. This was a very unathletic team. That was for years before this year. That was like a huge point of conversation, was like, this team is so unathletic. But they've certainly gotten more faster, younger, more athletic this season, and that is a positive step. You look at Tyler Fitzgerald, you look at Grant McCray, you look at all the young pitching, like a Hayden Birdsong and a Kyle Harrison and a Landon Roop and Tristan Beck and Mason Black and Elliot Ramos. There's a lot of young talent and athleticism and speed with the likes of McCray and Fitzgerald. So anyway, but I'm like, wait, but it took forever to get there. And Zaidi said, I think I've evolved in my views of things, and sort of that has to do with the culture around the Giants organization and the fan base, and things our fans want and things that this organization has done when it's been most successful, which might not have been how I was successful earlier in my career. And just to be clear, earlier in his career, he was with the Oakland A's, and they definitely do things like the way that we saw for the first several years under Farhan Zaidi, which was a lot of platooning, a lot of stuff that really irritated fans after several years of it. Platooning and kind of not having kind of staples in your lineup or your rotation, and doing openers and this and that and the other. And I think this team has been much more enjoyable to watch, even though they've disappointed, because it's been more normal baseball. And then he says, and so we've talked about it. I think there's been a meeting of the minds over time. And so basically what I'm hearing is that he's been told over time, I think he got some free reign early on, but when they started, they had their one magical season, but then a couple of disappointing seasons after that. I think he was told, listen, you can't, this is just not the product we want. And so it has been, in my opinion, a lot better this season. So it's interesting to hear him say that and to acknowledge it, that he's had to evolve. And I think we have seen that. If you've been paying attention, which a lot of my listeners, I know you are diehard fans, but I would say this year was far better in that regard. And a lot of it also has to do with the manager. He picked Gabe Kapler, and Gabe Kapler was going to manage like Gabe Kapler managed. Bob Melvin, a little bit more of a mix of kind of new school, old school, versus Kapler, firmly in the innovation and new school platoon, doesn't care if it looks non-traditional, but especially it doesn't look good if it doesn't work. And so it not only wasn't working, but it was also an undesirable style of play. So it was a bad combination. But anyway, the conversation then turns, at least in Baggerly's piece, which I highly recommend that you read in full on the Athletics website. But next, he gets into a number of specific topics, including Blake Snell's free agency, first base. Is that a position where they see a need to upgrade? Because that a lot of people have talked about Pete Alonso, and I've mentioned Christian Walker as perhaps a better fit than Pete Alonso. Bryce Eldridge, the 19-year-old, last year's first round 16th overall draft pick, all the way in AAA already. What about him? Tyro Estrada and what happened with him this season. Marco Luciano, and what Zaidi points to as their most acute need going into the offseason. We'll get into all of that and discuss the Giants causing havoc, continuing to cause havoc in the playoff race in just a minute. And before we get into it, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Game Time. I love going to games all season long. In the summer, in the winter, like not winter, but in the spring, I was in Boston and Denver. Man, was it cold, but it was still a lot of fun. And I'm planning to attend some postseason games this year. And Game Time makes the ticket experience so much better, because two of my favorite things: panoramic views from the seats, especially if I'm in a stadium I've never been to. I have to know, like, not just what does it look like on a two-dimensional seating chart, or, I mean, yeah, I was going to say or three-dimensional, but like different stadiums, they're all set up differently. You might be like way higher than you think. You got to get that panoramic view from your seat, and Game Time has that. Plus, the best thing of all is the Game Time guarantee, which means if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will just credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. All right, here we go. We're going to get into the rest of what Farhan Zaidi had to say in this very insightful kind of interview. I'm glad he did it. He's always been, well, maybe not always, but, you know, among executives, it was really hard to like nail down Brian Sabean, you know, for example. So I do appreciate the openness here by Farhan Zaidi with any executive. I'm not trying to take a shot at Brian Sabean, architect of 3 championships, by the way. You know, hat tip, no disrespect at all. I'm just saying, like, media-wise, Zaidi's pretty, nice and accommodating here. But a number of topics are discussed, and without further delay, mentioning Blake Snell, the takeaway I got was that they're not going to sign Snell to an extension prior to the season ending. Like, Snell is going to test free agency. He said he's going to go into free agency the same way he did last offseason. He wants to keep an open mind. I think will be pretty high on his list, but we're respecting the fact that he's going to want to play out free agency. I expect us to be part of that, but it should be very competitive with the way he's pitched. Maybe we have a seat at the table, but it's going to be a big table. There's so many typos. This is abnormal, but that's I'm just copying and pasting here. Anyway, anytime I hear that, I hear he's not coming back. So that would be my guess based on this quote. That's how I'm reading that. Whenever he says, like, oh, I think we'll be involved, but there's going to be a lot of teams involved. Like, they said that about Chris Bryant. I don't think they ever made any serious attempt to bring him back. Sure, they said it about Carlos Rodon. I don't think they ever made any serious attempt to bring him back. And so we'll see. But a pitcher is going to be 32 in year one of a deal. I just don't see them being, especially Farhan Zaidi. It depends. Like it was mentioned in the beginning of this piece, if it's not him, then would potentially change everything. You don't know. So we'll see. But He also addressed Bryce Eldridge, and he said, once a guy, Bryce Eldridge, just to, again, clarify, last year's first round draft pick by the Giants, 16th overall, teenager, 19 years old, has made it all the way to AAA with a monster season this year. So now he's knocking on the door, very much so. And he's a first baseman. He was an outfielder and a pitcher when they drafted him, but they've made him just a hitter and moved him to first base. And Zaidi said, once a guy is in AA, AAA, they're in the picture. I think it behooves us to have a roster, talking about 2025, that's flexible enough that if he's ready next year, even early in the year, there's a spot for him. So that's going to be really important for us. I don't anticipate us really locking up the first base and DH spot, end quote. And so there go your hopes and dreams if you were wanting Pete Alonso more than anyone, for example. I've pointed out many times Pete Alonso's defense does not grade out very well, and I've thought that a shorter term deal for a really good player in Christian Walker would make more sense, but they still do have the ability to bring back Lamont Wade, and Wilmer Flores has a player option, and so those two can come back, and they're a solid enough pair. I know Flores was bad, but he was also hurt this year, and Wade has been pretty much nothing but good, not great, but good when he's been healthy. And on Wade, Farhan Zaidi said, I think the challenge with him continues to be going wire to wire from a health standpoint. He has ability. It's maybe not the typical profile at first base, but I think he has a lot of value. So again, I think he's another guy who fits in as an important piece on a good team. It's just about having the right players around him. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, he shouldn't be anchoring your team. He shouldn't be your best player, but he's a good major league player. And as long as, this is what I keep saying, they've got to upgrade somewhere, clearly. But where? And you did look at first base as a possibility, but I guess they don't want to do that because, something we always acknowledged was that Bryce Eldridge is someone they view as a potential star per Alex Pavlovich and per the performance. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to look at the performance and say this guy could be really good when you're putting up these kind of numbers as a teenager. So Lamont Wade can be retained. Flores can choose to be retained, both on cheap contracts that wouldn't hinder them, and there would be flexibility to move on or have them be on the bench if Bryce Eldridge proves he's ready. So that does make sense. Although you do also think about the DH spot. And then you could kind of shift Wade and or Flores to DH if Eldridge proves he's ready early in the season. So he also mentions Thairo Estrada, and I think the key takeaway, I could do a whole episode about what a tough situation it was for Estrada, but basically Zaidi says, I think he's got a good chance to bounce back and be the guy he did in the past. What does that mean? Be the guy he was in the past, I'm assuming. But we're starting to look at some of these other options between Marco Luciano and Casey Schmidt and Fitzgerald. We were open to letting him go if someone was willing to bring him straight to the big leagues. That didn't happen. That's why they outrighted him to the minors. And essentially he said that they are not going to, Thairo Estrada is not in their plans moving forward, and he's going to be a minor league free agent. And so, we'll have at another date get into Thairo Estrada more, but, thank you for everything, Thairo Estrada. But it seems, with Luciano, Schmidt, Fitzgerald, and then a need to upgrade, that those guys kind of factor in maybe at second base. And then shortstop, which I already mentioned, is the position where there's a need and there are players in free agency who I think are attainable and kind of fit exactly with the style. I think Willy Adames and Ha-Seong Kim are two. I think one of those two players, I would put money on just one of those two players being on the Giants in 2025. Whether it's Adames or Kim, I don't know, but I think one of those two players will be a San Francisco Giant in 2025 and beyond, because it'll take a multi-year deal. So Zaidi, this is courtesy of Shayna Rubin of the Chronicle, said, "Will definitely be in the middle infield market. Obviously having Fitzgerald and his ability to be able to move around, and seeing Casey Schmidt at the end here is nice." And this was before, Casey Schmidt homered 2 days ago. But Schmidt's having a nice end of the season here, and that's what he's saying, Zaidi. He says, "We have some young players that can be a part of that mix. Adding somebody who is an established plus defender in the middle infield, just in the direction we've been heading as a team, is going to make a lot of sense for us. So whether I think that's trade or free agency, that's going to be a big target." And so he kind of has to say trade, because you can't say it's got to be a free agent. Otherwise, you lose some leverage in your free agent negotiations or whatever. But and look, those guys, Adames and Kim, could end up elsewhere, and then you do have to go the trade route. But to have a Chapman and Ha-Seong Kim or Willie Adames left side, an opening for youth at second base with Fitzgerald being the front runner, Luciano in that mix. He does get into Luciano. He says Luciano is also going to see time in the outfield, like we all knew and we discussed on this show. At the Arizona complex, Papago, he's working on outfield right now. And then first base, kind of keeping it open. You do kind of wonder, where do they upgrade? Oh, because lastly, on Mike Yastrzemski, I accidentally skipped over that. But Zaidi said, "I have a soft spot for Yaz. I think he's a really underappreciated player, a total pro, and does everything well. So I'm personally a big fan of his, and I think he can play a big role on a really good team." So I guess that doesn't totally mean on our team. Like, it could mean they try to trade him, whatever the case may be. I think so too. I think Yaz is a major league player. I think Lamont Wade, major league player. It's just the Giants need to upgrade. They're not, they're 500 right now. They do have a positive run differential. They are putting a whooping on contenders here right now, including the D-backs, whose playoff odds, I said I would mention it. I'm only going to briefly mention it, it appears. But their playoff odds went from like almost 90% to like 50% in these two games. Right now, Fangraphs has them at 53.3%. And coming into the series, I just want to get this exactly right. Fangraphs had them at 82.7. So I guess 83% down to 53%. So a 30 percentage point decline in 2 games against the Giants. And so, the Braves are just a half game behind them right now. And so if the Braves win tonight and the Giants win tonight, then all of a sudden Arizona's out of a playoff spot. And so this game is enormous for them. Enormous for the D-backs. So it's nice to see the Giants not just winning, but putting up huge wins against really good teams in the Orioles, Royals, and D-backs in the final road trip of the season. They've had trouble against contenders. They've had trouble on the road, and not so much right now. So anyway, I agree with what Bob Melvin said. It doesn't really mean like they are only good at playing when there's no pressure. I think it kind of more so is just baseball, and weird things like this do happen all the time. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow, breaking down this final game. Also, possibly my conversation with Millard. Giants are off on Thursday, so that could be a conversation that you hear on Friday. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.